be doing the same thing. See, help.
Good evening, this is News Night for June 14th, 2020. For this week I wish to follow up on the George Floyd protests and a particular incident that has marked the unfortunate direction that the president has chosen to take in regard to them. Last week on Monday, June the 1st, the president addressed the nation on the protests and riots going on across the country, and his input was less than stellar.
Today I have strongly recommended to every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers that we dominate the streets.
However, the more important occurrence is what happened almost immediately after the speech. The president proceeded to walk from the White House over to St. John's Church. To get there he had to make his way through Lafayette Square, an area where peaceful protesters had been protesting all day. As the president was wrapping up his speech, federal officers, the Secret Service, etc., all armed with riot protection gear, shields, tear gas, pepper spray and rubber bullets, began to violently disperse the crowd. All of this was done between 6:30 p.m. and 6:50 p.m., which was before the 7 p.m. curfew. The order for this was permitted by the president and given in extension by Attorney General Bill Barr. Footage of the crowd being dispersed is ruthless, despicable, and a complete affront to the very Constitution that the president swore to defend. Such memorable moments include punching a cameraman from an Australian news agency, stinger ball grenades, and sparks from guns firing rubber bullets, making this once peaceful protest look like a war zone. Upon arriving at the church, after banning a priest from the church for quote-unquote security reasons, the president stood in front of the church. He did not pray. He did not do anything remotely along the lines of paying respects. He simply held a Bible upside down and had photos taken for a campaign video. Shortly after, a photo from the ordeal was retweeted by Governor Scott Walker. Governor Walker said, quote, "Hard to imagine any other president having the guts to walk out of the White House." Now I can hurl any number of snarky insults at this, but I will let the words of this wise man sum it up.
Yeah, it sure takes a real man to order other people with guns to fire munitions at civilians, American citizens exercising their constitutional right to protest, and then walk between 100 armed guards and Secret Service members for a 2-minute photo op after clearing the area. Real guts.
So overall, why is this issue so important? Well, this shows that President Trump is not only incapable of caring about your First Amendment rights, but now he has taken direct action against them. And Scott Walker is just another example of yet another Republican who doesn't criticize the president, but rather sucks up to him and enables his now authoritarian actions. So what does all of this mean in regards to the president? Well, by now you know I'm by no means a fan of Donald Trump, and I admit that bias. However, bias is irrelevant in this particular case. This is a president enforcing oppression of First Amendment rights, all for his own desire to take a photo. A right to protest is fundamental to America, and any president who tramples on that is both unelectable and detestable. Violence against peaceful protest is rampant in American history, from civil rights to the infamous Kent State anti-Vietnam War protest of 1970 under President Nixon. But even in that infamous event, it is hard to say how much influence President Nixon had leading up to the killing of peaceful protesters. However, one moment in history is more notorious. In 1932, World War I veterans marched en masse in Washington, D.C. to advocate for immediate cash payments for veteran bonus certificates. These certificates were to be a response to the Great Depression for veterans. However, they could not be used for years, despite these veterans needing the money immediately. As a result, more than 40,000 people composed of veterans, their families, and supporters gathered in Washington, D.C. to protest and ask the government for immediate payment. On July 28, 1932, approximately 11,698 people remained after weeks of protest. Then President Herbert Hoover ordered the U.S. Army to evict the remaining protesters from the city. Their camps were set on fire, tear gas grenades were thrown, troops charged with bayonets, and shots were fired at the protesters. It should be noted in some instances the military had objects thrown at them. However, the amount of force used in response went far beyond anything reasonable. Within the first day, 2 veterans were killed and 55 injured. This incident was the catalyst that led to Herbert Hoover losing the 1932 election to FDR. President Hoover oppressed the First Amendment rights of peaceful protesters, inciting violence upon people who exercised the most fundamental right of all Americans, freedom of speech and protest. This infamous moment in history was mimicked by President Trump. While thankfully no one died, people were injured in the incident at Lafayette Square, and they had their rights oppressed. Now after that startling comparison to the events of June 1, 2020, you would be right in wondering what the White House had to say in response. Well, it was about as pathetic as you would expect.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
The country and the world saw this violent clash between people who were otherwise peacefully protesting, but really the president is not sorry for the way things went?
No, the president is sorry about the fact that Antifa wreaked havoc in our streets and the failure of some members of the media to note that. Like CNN's Chris Cuomo said, show me where it says protesters are supposed to be peaceful. Well, I point him to the First Amendment where it says that you have the right to, quote, peaceably assemble. He should go back and read the Constitution.
Tell me more.
To move the perimeter. It's what prompted Park Police to say that evening, the perimeter must be moved. It's what prompted, it's what prompted AG Barr to agree with that decision on Monday morning that the perimeter needed to be moved. But when you hurl objects at Park Police, when you don't move after 3 orders are given, Park Police acted appropriately. When the shield of Park Police was batted down when one person tried to grab a Park Police officer's weapon, that's not peaceful by any definition of the word.
The White House remains steadfast in the belief that the federal officers had objects thrown at them, and that one officer had someone reach for their weapon. In regard to the former, video evidence has shown objects being thrown at officers were comprised of eggs, water bottles, and candy bars. And it should be noted that many protesters yelled for people not to throw anything at the officers. And in regard to the latter, a single individual reaching at an officer's weapon does not justify violently attacking an entire crowd of otherwise peaceful protesters. The Trump administration's desire to never apologize for anything has only now served to further condemn their actions in oppressing the most fundamental right of all Americans to express free speech peacefully in the form of protest. For that I openly and wholeheartedly condemn Trump and his administration, because the First Amendment is one that frankly, no president should ever mess with, lest they be condemned to the pages of history as a failed leader. In that regard, Mr. Trump, for your actions, you have failed as a leader. In other news, Russia has a large oil spill into the Arctic Ocean, causing the worst oil disaster since the BP oil spill in 2010. The United States and Russia seem to be launching a new sequel called Cold War II Electric Boogaloo. And Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, is on track to become the first trillionaire in history.
Show me the money!
Thank you for watching this episode. The unfortunate truth about today's topic was that the right to free speech and protest is fundamental and yet has been under attack. So I will make this simple. If you are someone who lives in America and you believe the right to free speech and protest should not be protected, then as a certain man once said,
Alright, yeah, get him the hell out of here, will you please? Get him out of here.
that's our show. Good night.